the year 2022 has been an eventful one. All that could go wrong, chances are it probably did go wrong. But despite all of that, there have been some inspirational stories and good news that was worthy for us to write home about. Now, these may have not hogged the headlines, but the Good Things Guy made sure you knew all about them. Who is better than the Good Things Guy to tell us about all these success stories for the year in South Africa? More than the founder himself of Good Things Guy, Brent Lindeque. Thank you very much for joining us, Brent. And I don't know if you heard my previous conversation, but my team and I had committed ourselves to making an hour full of good news. We're trying. South Africa, it's a little bit difficult to find some good news at the moment, but I'm hoping that you're going to be highlighting some of the beautiful things that happen in and around South Africa. And maybe let's start with that. Some of the highlights for you when it comes to some of the green shoots in the country.
So first of all, good morning. What an absolute honor to be here. Thank you for having me. Secondly, you know, it is tough. And living in South Africa, we have a very complex relationship with this country. There are a lot of challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. We know it. You work in the newsroom. You're reporting on the things that are really important. But at Good Things Guy, we believe the good news is just as important as the real hard-hitting stuff. And the way that we see the world in a better light and we sort of get hope for our country is by delving into those good news stories. When looking back on the year, it's so tough. There are so many good news stories. I forget how much good stuff is happening around us. Our reporters report on up to 15 good news stories every day. And you sort of get lost in them because you forget about the good stuff that's been happening. But here's the crazy thing. Every Friday, we send out this newsletter to a couple of 100,000 people that goes out every single Friday with the good news. And just yesterday, one of our readers replied to us, thanking us for that newsletter. And she'd actually compiled a list of all the good news that she felt was really needed to be highlighted from our site and from South Africa to the world. And she compiled a 110-page document with all the highlights, just the headlines that she'd found that had made her feel all the feels for our country. And she'd actually taken that document and sent it to her entire company. Over 300 employees that she shared that with. So I've got that document in front of me now. And just looking back, I'm going to take us back to sort of January to look at some of the cool stuff and the headlines that were on our site. Maybe not in mainstream media, but definitely here. One of the first big news stories of 2022 was a South African who got accepted as an engineer for helping Lewis Hamilton. I don't know if anybody remembers that. We also had a Joburg team that made it into the prestigious Ivy League. He got accepted out of hundreds and thousands of applicants. We had rhino rescues. We had an incredible, talented 8-year-old who wrote her first book, one of the youngest South Africans. We had a South African story which I remember so beautifully from February this year. It was the South African that found a dog, and the dog was on its last days. It had lived a terrible life. It was in a shelter for most of its life, and she took that dog in to spend its last couple of weeks with her. Just a beautiful, heartfelt story about looking after animals. We had Channing Tatum, who is this Hollywood superstar that we know from Magic Mike, who accepted one of our South African dancers into one of his actual shows, which is a reason to celebrate. Just so many good news stories. The Wonder Bag, which is that bag that keeps the food warm without electricity, that got put into one of the top 50 genius companies leading into the future by Time magazine. And that was around about March this year. So, I mean, that's just a couple of stories that I'm shouting out. And that was the first quarter of the year. There are good things happening, I promise, every single day.
Every single day, indeed. And you speak about the phenomenal things that South Africans are doing on an international platform. And it reminds me, Brent, and I don't know if you were part of this particular coverage, but Loyiso singing for the Beckhams as they renewed their wedding vows. Loyiso, a South African singer who just went out there and stunned the world with his amazing voice. He's subsequently got onto Disney soundtrack songs. And so it's just an indication mention that despite all the negativity, South Africa is a good place. And just to ask you on a broader level, how important has it been for you and the rest of the Good Things Guy team to keep the positivity and, despite all the heaviness of the negativity that we're seeing, highlight the importance of the good and what it's doing to the country, so that we keep that faith and the hope in the beauty that is South Africa?
Listen, I say it often, and I'll say it again now. The importance of knowing what's happening around us, what ENCA does, the good work that you do by telling those real hard-hitting stories, it's so important. We have to know what's happening in our country. But at the same time, I believe not just as South Africans, but as human beings, we require balance. We need a bit of good to sort of outweigh the realness and the hardness that we're currently going through and do go through on a daily basis. And I think that's why I like to say I've got one of the best jobs in the world, because we get to report on those good news stories. But you ask the question, how important is it? Utterly important. We have to be filling our minds with good things. Otherwise, we'll lose hope in this country. And perhaps I might be a little bit one-sided because I'm filled with so many good things. But I get to see the good stuff that's happening in South Africa. I get to see the opportunities. I get to see the good people that are doing really good things for our country. There's that quote that I absolutely love. Fred Rogers in the 1970s, he had a show called The Neighborhood. And he said, in times of tragedy, we need to look for the helpers. And I can tell you this, helpers are always there. In South Africa, let there be a moment of charity. We're watching it now, the flooding, what is happening in Johannesburg with all the rains, what you guys have been reporting on this morning. Just wait. The helpers are there, and they're there to pick up the pieces, to help their neighbors, and really help us rise as South Africa to be a better country.
Here's what's also quite interesting, and I quite enjoyed, is that we are dealing with different causes as a country in different ways. Good Things Guy, the website, covered the story around rhino poaching and how the Drakensberg Boys Choir has gotten on board with that particular campaign to ring the bell on poaching and really bring it to an end, and the beautiful music that has been produced thereof. So the creativity in highlighting awareness to big critical issues in the country has also been something to celebrate this year, has it not, Brent?
Absolutely. We know the problems we have. We see them on a daily basis, but there are the helpers. And it's these organizations, these institutions, sometimes it's individuals that are just getting stuck in and really helping South Africa be the country that we all wish and hope for. If we take a look back, so in 2019, there was the South African woman in Johannesburg near the Henops River called Taryn Johnson. And Taryn Johnson, she looked around and she just thought to herself, you know, the river's really dirty. I don't like it. I believe that as a human being, we should be able to drink from our rivers, which is something which is so unheard of in our country. And she got stuck in. She started cleaning the river. She started cleaning her community and what's around her. And while she did that, the community started to get involved. And they started to help her clean that river as well. And just a couple of weeks ago, her organization, which is now called the Henops Revival, they celebrated removing and diverting over 2 million kilograms of trash out of that river and helping it not get to Hartbeespoort Dam. One person with one simple idea to make just their area and their community a better place is impacting a whole region, Gauteng itself. Isn't that beautiful? It's the helpers. So in times of tragedy, that's it. Look for the helpers.
Absolutely, Brent. And then, of course, who can forget Takarani Sesame? I don't know about you, but I grew up on Takarani Sesame as a young person. I'm not all that old. I don't want the viewers to think I'm old. But I did grow up with Takarani Sesame, and it's an authentically South African piece of work that is done for children and educational purposes. And it won for the best mixed media series in preschool programming, and that is the category in the 14th annual Kids Screen Awards. That is important as well, right? The work that we produce as creatives and otherwise is well enough or good enough to be recognized on a global stage. And this is but one example.
just one example. The awards that we've received as a country this year is insane. There was that graphic design student a couple of weeks ago that became the first Emmy winner for Limpopo. Like, that's insane. That's absolutely crazy. So, yes, celebrate the small wins, I always say. But when we can be celebrated on a global scale, like the award of Takalani Sesame, that's when we can look to the globe and say, we're here. We're good enough. Actually, we're just as good as you, and we're producing incredible stuff here in South Africa, not just on the creative front, but also with the charity organizations and individuals that are doing great things.
No, absolutely. And when you speak about charity organizations, we think about a Gift of the Givers, whose founder recently got an honorary doctorate for the work that that organization does. But thank you, Brent, for joining us this morning. Brent Lindeque, just highlighting that there is more to the world than the power cuts, the corruption, the para scandals, and everything else in South Africa. There is a mix of amazing things that people are doing in the country as well that are being seen in the world. Thank you very much for your time this morning. We're talking good things that are happening in South Africa, and that is just a few examples of what is going on.